Epithelial tissue. Epithelial tissue is located throughout the body. It covers the body's surface in the form of skin. It covers and lines internal organs like the respiratory tract and the digestive tract, and it makes up glands that secrete and excrete things both into the body and out of the body. What does epithelial tissue look like? So epithelial tissue is composed of tightly packed cells. As you can see in the picture here, the cells are very close together and there is not a lot of space in between the cells. Epithelial tissue also lacks blood vessels. It doesn't have its own blood supply. And since we get nourishment from the blood, or since cells get nourishment from the blood, it has to have some source of its nutrients. And so it gets them from the underlying connective tissue. So you'll see that epithelial tissue is always connected to connective tissue so that it can get nutrients from the blood-rich connective tissue. Lastly, an important characteristic of epithelial tissue is that it's able to rapidly divide so that it can quickly replace dead or damaged cells. It sheds them and then creates new cells that come up underneath. When we look at the basic structure of an epithelial tissue, we can see here, firstly, that the pink is the epithelium. So that's the epithelial tissue. You'll always see it, like I mentioned, connected to connective tissue because it needs the blood supply that comes from the connective tissue. Keep in mind that connective tissue is a different type of tissue, but it is closely paired with epithelium because the epithelium needs it. So looking at the epithelium itself, it has three surfaces, I guess technically four sides, but two of them have the same name. So you have the apical surface or the free surface. This surface is going to be next to an open space. It might be the outside of the body, or it might be an open space within the body, like the inside of an organ. Then you have the basal surface. The basal surface is the surface that is closer to the underlying connective tissue, and it is attached to connective tissue by what's called the basement membrane. The basement membrane is a thin, non-living layer that's like glue that connects the epithelium to the underlying connective tissue. The other surface of your epithelium are these lateral surfaces, so these are the side surfaces. So again, you have the apical or free surface that opens to some sort of space, the basal surface that is close to the basement membrane and the connective tissue, and then you have the lateral surfaces that are touching other epithelium. Epithelial tissue is classified based on its cell type for the most part. It's important to understand both cell shape and the number of layers. The cell shape and the number of layers are going to help determine the function of the epithelium. So when you're looking at cell shape, there are three main shapes of cells. Squamous cells are thin and flat like tiles. Cuboidal cells are shaped like cubes. And columnar cells are shaped like columns, so they're longer and skinnier. Additionally, epithelial cells can come in different layers within the tissue. If there is a single layer of epithelial cells, this is called simple epithelial tissue. If there are multiple layers, so two or more layers of cells, this is called stratified tissue. So when you look at the types of tissue here, at least for 6 of the 9 types, you can see that a cell shape combines with a number of layers to form the name. So if we look at squamous tissue, we see that these are all roughly tile-shaped. They're thin and flat compared to some of these other types of cells. So the squamous means they're thin and flat. Simple means it's one layer of thin, flat cells. Stratified squamous epithelium is multiple layers of these thin, flat cells. It's the same for cuboidal and for columnar. One interesting type of epithelium is pseudostratified columnar epithelium. You can see here pseudo-stratified means it looks like it's stratified, but it's not. It looks like it's stratified, it appears to be stratified, because the nuclei are at all different layers. However, if you trace these cells, you can see that the same cell touches the basal layer as does the apical layer. Even these weird shaped ones here, it's long along the basal layer and it's just barely touching the apical layer, but one cell does run the whole length of the tissue, as opposed to a stratified tissue where only one side touches the basal, and then this one doesn't have a side that touches the basement membrane. You have two other types of tissue, of epithelial tissue. Transitional epithelium is found in the bladder, and so it's all lots of different shapes, and the shape of the tissue depends on whether the bladder is full or it's empty. And then you have glandular epithelium. Glandular epithelium makes up your glands, and in the base here, it secretes something, either into an organ, into the respiratory or digestive tracts, or out of the body. So now that we know the structure of epithelial tissue, we can connect it to the function. The function of epithelial tissue differs depending on where in the body it's located. Epithelial tissue can function for protection, absorption, secretion, or excretion. So secretion is releasing a substance into the body. Excretion is releasing it out of the body. Each type of tissue, depending on the location, may have more than one of these functions, but it doesn't have all four at once. So for example, we have a stratified squamous epithelium on the left and a simple squamous epithelium on the right. You can see it's the same approximate cell shape, but there are multiple layers in the stratified tissue on the left. Because this tissue is thicker, it's going to function for protection. The skin is made up of stratified squamous epithelium. Because there are so many layers, it's a good protective barrier. Something like on the right, the simple squamous epithelium would not be very good for protection, because if that one layer is damaged, you're already at the connective tissue. There are no extra layers there to help protect. However, this thin tissue is really good for absorbing things. So for example, your lungs have simple squamous epithelium, which means that carbon dioxide and oxygen can diffuse through them very quickly, as opposed to having to diffuse through a stratified tissue. So that is a brief overview of epithelial tissue.